Do you have favorite techniques that you've forgotten about? I've been so focused on gel printing lately that I realized I'd pretty much forgotten some other really good background techniques. And I've got some friends in a similar situation, so we all got together to create a mini hop to highlight all these forgotten treasures and give you some inspiration for techniques maybe you've forgotten about. I'll link to the next video at the end so you can hop along. But right now, let's get started with this technique. There are lots of ways to use markers to create backgrounds, from simple stripes to plaids, bright multicolors to tone on tone. But this faux mosaic technique is one of my favorites, and it's so easy. I started with a number of strips of cardstock. These are about 5.5 by 2 inches, and all I need to do is make some stripes going down the short side. I'm going to cut the strips into smaller strips later with a strip die. Cutting them this long will give me some options later, and I'll explain that a bit better when I get to it. I've got a bunch of Copic markers here, and they make it easy because of that thick chisel tip nib, but this will work with any markers you have. You could even watercolor it if you want. So I've got 2 reds, 2 pinks, 2 aquas, and 2 greens, and I've got 6 pieces of cardstock. First, I want to make some more single-colored panels, and I started with one that had the 2 shades of green. You can alternate between your 2 colors, but I'm a bit lazy, and I decided to put down all the light green stripes first and then go back with the dark green. It doesn't matter that these stripes aren't perfectly straight, but if you prefer, you could use a ruler or another straight edge. To make them as straight as I could, I found it worked well to move my whole arm down rather than just my wrist. I hope you can see what I mean. Now that it's time for the dark green, you can see that some of my stripes are not evenly spaced. And again, if that bothers you, you can be more precise. But I just filled in all the white space until I had a fully striped green panel. Then I moved on to the aqua. Now you could start by using colored cardstock and just put darker stripes on top, or you could make your own colored cardstock with your ink pads and then put your darker stripes on top. I chose to do it this way because once I'm done the green, the aqua, the pink, and the red, then I'm going to do a couple with all 8 of my colors, which I couldn't do on colored cardstock. So this way all my colors will match better. Now this time I did go one by one with my markers, and I took the caps off all of them and lined them up in the order I wanted them down the right side of my work area. Remember, I'm left-handed, so this way I won't be putting my sleeve into those marker nibs. For this panel, I did the light then the dark of each color, alternating between the red side and the green side. I have a couple of things to say about this method, and the first is that I used a pad of recycled newsprint behind my panels, but I could have done it on a piece of acetate. The slicker surface doesn't allow the ink that seeps through my white cardstock to absorb, and I think sometimes that gives better results. I honestly just didn't think of it, and that's because of the second thing I want to say, which is that as I was doing this, I realized that I've pretty much forgotten about using my markers at all. I can't remember the last time I colored something, and I can see that they need a little TLC, and some of them even need a refill. For the second panel with all the colors, I changed the order so the 2 panels won't be identical. This time I did all the light colors, then all the dark, and when I was finished, you can see that they give quite a different look. The next step was to use my strip dies to trim the panels into stripy strips. I have a couple of old ones here in different sizes, and you can use whatever size you have. I think the narrower one gives more of a square look on the strip itself, and in the end I cut some with the narrower one and some with the wider one. You could even use a trimmer if you prefer. So now comes the fun part, putting it together. I wanted to be able to practice so that I could get a good mix of color, and I used the small grip mat so that I could easily change things around if I needed to. As I built up my pattern, I was watching the placement of the colors, so if I had colors lining up a little too matchy-matchy, I could either turn the strip or move it along so I was happier. And that's the reason I made the strips this long, to give me those options. I was especially watching that dark red because it kind of stands out, so I didn't want too much of it all grouped together. Once I had my pattern built, it was time to transfer it onto a piece of printer paper that I had covered with glue. I used my glue dot runner because it is forgiving. Sometimes I wasn't getting the strips down exactly straight, and I needed to pull them back up and replace them. Isn't this fun? The colors make me happy, and it's so easy to get a different look just by creating your strips differently. Or you could put narrow white strips or metallic strips in the pattern to get yet another look. Once I had it all done, I flipped it over and burnished it from the back to make sure everything was well glued down. And then I trimmed it down to a full-size panel. Now, when you've put this much work into a background, it's nice to be able to get 2 cards out of it. So I went for a very simple die-cut inlay technique with this waffle flower Christmas tree. I cut a tree out of my colorful panel, and then I cut it again from a white panel, and I swapped them. The white tree goes with the colored background, and the colored tree goes on the white background. And of course, those trees fit perfectly into the holes, just like puzzle pieces. I taped each tree in place in its respective panel before adding some of my favorite iridescent shimmer spray and some gold watercolor splatter. These two products are my favorite way to add some shimmer and shine to Christmas cards without adding any bulk. For my sentiment, I cut a waffle flower Merry Christmas die set with a shadow from both black and white, and I added them directly on top of the cards. Which one do you like better? I think the white areas on both of them really help the colors pop and make them feel very crisp and clean. My next forgotten technique is my cling stamps. I am attracted to them, I buy them, and then for some reason I forget to use them, which is a shame because these stamps are so versatile and they lend themselves to so many techniques. This is the Acanthus background stamp from Hero Arts, and I have it in my Misty with a grip mat. And I kind of went back and forth about whether to remove that grip mat, but it's sticky and that makes it a little difficult to remove. So I decided to give it a try without removing it. I put my cardstock into the center of the Misty base, and I noted where I had placed it. You'll see why I needed to do that in a minute, and it's not because the panel lifted from that mat. I inked the stamp up with my red ink and then stamped it down carefully. Now honestly, I could feel that leaving that grip mat in the base probably made it too thick and added extra tension to the hinges on the door. So my recommendation would be to remove the grip mat and use a thinner grip mat for a cling stamp. But isn't this gorgeous? It's so rich and detailed and very, very elegant. I cleaned up my Misty and I stamped it again with Fiesta Blue ink, making sure to put the panel in the same spot. I want the stamping to be exactly the same on the two panels. But Fiesta Blue was a mistake, although I didn't realize it at this point. This ink is much more blue than aqua, but stick around for my rescue strategy. Now I fully intended to do a similar reverse inlay thing here, and I cut a circle from the red panel, then used the red panel to line up the die again on the blue panel. I want the patterns to fit in perfectly when I swap the circles, like this. Next, I wanted to add some shading, so I used Lime Ricky on the blue circle and panel, just around the edges. I'm starting to realize that the Fiesta Blue wasn't right at this point. There's just too much difference between it and the Lime Ricky, but I kept going. Then I added some party dress to the red circle and panel, which is a much more tone-on-tone look. I'm using a grip mat on a rotating platform. This makes it really easy to change the position of the cardstock I'm blending into. Okay, so there they are, and I'm starting to rethink my plan at this point. It's just not giving me the elegant look I was hoping for, but it still took me a while to figure out how to fix it. I started with my shimmer spray and the gold splatter. This spray definitely softens the colors, but the difference was still too much for me. So I grabbed my Aquatini ink with a plan to lay down a very light layer all over to reduce the difference. But I was impatient. My panel wasn't fully dry yet. And I forgot that my Aquatini ink had recently been re-inked, so I ended up with more Aquatini than I intended. And I ended up smudging the gold splatters. Oh boy. Anyway, here's the two card panels on the card bases and the big moment. Red on aqua or red on red? In the end, I went tone on tone, and I think that the edge created by the circle die cut, plus the blending around that edge, helps to define that area even without having to interchange the circles. I've lost a bit of the detail from the stamp with all that ink blending on the green panel, but overall I'm pretty happy with it, and it shows how you can get two completely different looks with just one background stamp. To finish these cards, I added some white die cut sentiments, one from Waffle Flower and one from Hero Arts. I actually like to die cut extras each time I'm cutting sentiments and to keep them on hand for future cards. But sometimes, and by that I mean most of the time, I lose the dots. So I solved that little problem by using dies like these that cut lots of little dots, and I keep a little envelope of various size dots to be used in these emergencies. Again, I didn't add any gems or any dimension at all really to keep these postage friendly, but the shimmer and the gold as well as that rich pattern keep these looking very festive. Although that background in different colors could really work at any time of year. I love products like that. Okay, final forgotten technique. Here, I'm showing you my sandwich for embossing with a stencil. I have two Sizzix plates taped together as my base. Then I add my stencil, which is from Hero Arts, then my cardstock, my embossing mat, and finally a single Sizzix cutting plate. I wrote this sandwich down ages ago, and I'm glad I did because, as I mentioned, this is one stencil technique I haven't done in ages. But it works so well, and it gives you yet another way to use a stencil by giving you the look of an embossing folder. And just like an embossing folder, you can use either side depending on the look you prefer. I decided to do some ink blending over top to help highlight the dimension on the panel, and I added pink first, bringing it down about 2/3 of the way. Then I added red just on the top end. I turned the panel and used the aqua 2/3 of the way, and I think this was another little mistake. By overlapping the pink and aqua so much, I created quite a big area of kind of a purple. And I think if I was making this card again, I would try to limit that overlap. I don't hate it, it just doesn't exactly fit in with my color scheme today. I added green to the bottom edge to finish the blending, then I added the shimmer spray. Watch how the pink ink changes with it. Then I added the gold splatter. Now, one thing to note is that if you want to use a die to trim down a panel that's been embossed, you should do that before you emboss it. Running it through a die cutting machine at this point will flatten all that dimension, which can give you another neat look, but it's not the look I was going for on this card. So I used my trimmer to trim it down to give me a nice crisp white border on all sides. Then I added a pretty pink posh die cut sentiment along with some Catherine Pooler snowflakes. See how the thin line weight of all these die cuts is similar? That's why they work well together, even though they're from different companies. Wow, that was a lot of fun. A walk through technique memory lane. Which one would you try? Or is there an old favorite you have that you need to dust off and try again? Now I'm all excited to head over to the next video right here and then the rest of the hop to see what other techniques I might have forgotten about. I hope you'll join me. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.